Kia ora koutou, welcome to another Cahoots tool training video. This one is for the bandsaw. We have two bandsaws. As always, this is not intended to be standalone training. This is intended to be used in conjunction with training in the Cahoots Workshop or as a refresher. The bandsaw is quite a simple concept. There is a large loop of blade inside here, which goes around the bottom, over the wheel and down through the table. If I move the guard up, then you can see more of the blade. The blade is constantly moving in that loop, and so it's cutting downwards towards the table. The teeth are angled that way. The bandsaw is mostly used for making intricate cuts freehand in timber. That means you can cut tenons, you can cut curves, you can cut all kinds of intricate shapes for furniture. It can also be used with a fence or a guide for rip cuts or for resawing timber, so taking a large block, cutting it down the middle to make two blocks. It can pretty much cut timber in any orientation, as long as the timber will fit on the table between the saw blade and the pillar here, and between the table and the top of the throat. You can see that's the potential to cut a very thick piece of timber. You can also cut some plastics, and on our metal cutting bandsaw, which I'll show you soon, you can cut metal. The limitations of a bandsaw are that the blade can tend to move. The blade can tend to twist or to lean slightly, depending on how you're pushing timber through it, and that can lead to uneven cuts, particularly over a longer distance. Avoiding uneven cuts like that really is a matter of developing experience with the bandsaw, experience with how the blade works when you push timber, how much force to apply, and of course the blade tension. As always, hazards with the bandsaw include dust, so respiratory protection and eye protection. This bandsaw does have dust extraction, which helps. The saw can be loud during operation, so hearing protection. There's also a risk from contact with the blade. Obviously, this blade is very capable of doing damage to your hands, to your body, and so we're going to stick to the 4-inch rule, 100mm rule. That is the idea that your hands should stay 4 inches, about 100mm, 10 centimeters from the blade at all times when it's operating. Bandsaw blades don't cause kickback in the same way that table saws do, where the piece can be thrown back at you, but they can cause a phenomenon called kick down. If I was cutting a workpiece that isn't fully supported by the table and the blade binds, it can pull that end of the workpiece down and flip the other end up. That can be quite violent. Workpiece should always be in contact with the table. If the piece is an unusual shape, chair leg for a piece of furniture, something complicated like that, then you can end up with a shape that doesn't fully sit on the table, and that's when the kick down can happen. So keeping the workpiece as supported as possible and as flat on the table as possible is important. In terms of setting up this saw, it's important to make sure that the blade is tensioned. When you come and use the saw for the first time, the blade should be slackened. That preserves the blade and the bearings when the saw is not in use. Whoever used it before you should have left the blade under slack tension. Moving the lever here, and there's a nice little diagram to help guide you. We'll put the blade under tension. This saw has an emergency stop, which presses on top of the normal start-stop buttons. To release it, slide it up, and then it will lift. Whenever you're going to be inspecting the blade, if your hands are going to be here, lock the tool out with the e-stop, and now no one can start it. There's no chance of this blade moving. We can check the tension of this blade. Tension feels pretty good to me. It's based on experience. It's a complicated thing. That brings us on to the blade guides as well. There's a blade guide here. There are bearings that the blade runs between. And there's another set underneath here. This is a really complicated adjustment. Adjusting those, making sure that the blade is running through them nicely, takes a lot of experience, takes a lot of time. These should be adjusted for you by Cahoots staff, but you can check that the blade appears to be running nicely through those bearings, and you can look at the ones below as well. Please don't attempt to adjust them without talking to Cahoots staff. What you can adjust is this guard and guide. This should be low down, close to the thickness of the piece of wood that you're cutting. That does two things. That's going to protect us from the blade up here, less of the blade is exposed, it's less of a hazard. And it's also going to move this guide close to the timber to create a nice straight cut. The guide adjusts up and down with the large wheel here, and the small wheel twists to lock it in place. There's also a light on this tool, which we can activate and position to help us see what we're doing. As I said, adjusting the guides here and here is something that, along with blade tension, requires some experience. That's not something we're going to get right into here. Same with changing the blade. All of those things are beyond the scope of this video, and nobody needs another 20-minute tool video. So I'll do final check, get my PPE, and then we'll make a cut on this saw. So I have my eye protection, my hearing protection. I'll turn the dust extraction on. I'm wearing no loose clothing. I've got my hair tied up. I've checked the area around me. There's no one working in this area. We're ready to go. To start the saw, we need to release the e-stop, and then under there we have the start and stop buttons. To start the saw, we press the green button. To stop it, we press the red button. If you want to stop it quickly or easily, you can just press the e-stop as well. You can see that was easy to cut this curve in that piece of timber. This blade is quite thin, which means cutting curves is easy. Thicker blades will run more true in the curve. They will make straighter cuts. We do have different blades, but as I said, we're not going to talk about changing and tensioning them in this video. You can use a miter gauge in here, like the one we've got on the table saw, to make cross cuts of timber or cut at defined angles, although this might not be the best tool for the job. The table saw might be better, or the miter saw. You can also clamp a fence to the table or use a fence rail that sits in here to create long, straight cuts against that fence. Again, this might not be the right tool for the job. The table saw might be better, but the table saw only has a fairly defined depth of cut, whereas if we move the blade guard up, the throat of this saw is very large, and so we can cut very large blocks of timber that we can't do on the table saw. In terms of finishing up, remember the 4-inch rule, so we're not reaching in here to grab the piece of timber that we've just cut until the saw is off. I always turn the saw off with the e-stop. It's locked out now, the blade is safe. And when you've finished using the tool, you can turn the light off and we can drop the tension off the blade for the next person. There are a couple of other things to mention about bandsaw. Don't leave it running. You can see I've already put my PPE on here. It's very common for people to sort of see this as a table and put things on here. This is bad practice. I'm only doing this for purposes of demonstration. And if the blade is running, this encourages people to get their hands too close to the blade. So we don't use this for storage. We don't put papers, tea, PPE, things like that on here. We keep the table clear when we're not working with the saw. Also make sure the saw is turned off. Don't leave it running, even if you've just got to pop and get a piece of timber, because it's quite quiet and people might not notice that it is running. If you're in the middle of a cut and for some reason the blade jams, don't try and back the piece of timber out. You can damage the blade, pulling the blade in the wrong direction, pulling it into the guard. Instead, turn off the saw and then carefully remove the timber. Now I want to show you the metal cutting bandsaw. As you can see, it's the same basic configuration as the wood cutting bandsaw. It has a different blade. This blade has a lot more teeth. They are finer, they're closer together. And so much like with a hacksaw or with a jigsaw, those teeth are more suited to cutting metal. This bandsaw also moves at a slower speed, and so the blade is again more appropriate for cutting metal. All the same rules apply with this bandsaw. It doesn't have a quick release tensioner, and so this saw tends to stay under tension, although we will show you when you do your training the handle on the back for tensioning and loosening the blade. This saw has an on-off switch which are down here at the front, and everything else is basically the same. Cutting metal takes longer, and you should use cutting compound to do it. That's either a cutting oil or a cutting paste, and of course it's a slower process than cutting timber on the timber cutting bandsaw. The metal cutting bandsaw is much less suited to cutting curves. Really, we're just usually using it for cutting straight lines into all kinds of bits of steel. Those straight lines can be used to build up more complex shapes, and you can cut really quite precisely on this as well. The same PPE is required. and I'll demonstrate a cut now. That time I cut into this hole in the center of this piece of steel, and so when I did that, I'm not going to try and remove the piece from the saw blade while it's running. I've stopped the saw, and now I can remove the workpiece. The same thing applies as on the timber bandsaw. Workpiece should be hard against the table here. The height of the guide can be adjusted, just like it can on the timber bandsaw, and it should be brought down or up to just accommodate the material that you're working with. And so that's the metal cutting bandsaw and the timber cutting bandsaw. The metal cutting saw is a very useful tool for all kinds of little cuts. The woodworking bandsaw is one of the most useful tools in the woodworking shop. You can do all kinds of intricate work with it. And as long as you respect the 4-inch rule, it's a really very safe way to cut as well. So, thank you for watching another tool training video, which hopefully was not 20 minutes. Come down to the workshop and make something.